At 11:27 on the morning of May 23, 1944, Technical Sergeant Van Barfoot crouched behind a destroyed German ammunition truck near Carano, Italy, watching three Tiger tanks roll toward his position across open ground 75 yards away. 24 years old, 4 months of combat at Anzio, never faced a Tiger before. The German 14th Army had just launched an armored counterattack with three Panzerkampfwagen 6 Tigers, each weighing 57 tons and mounting an 88mm gun that could destroy any American tank at ranges exceeding 2 miles. The Anzio beachhead had cost the Allies 24,000 American and 10,000 British casualties over 4 months of continuous combat. Barfoot's battalion had been fighting since the January landings, trapped in a 7-mile perimeter surrounded by German artillery on 3 sides. Every day, German shells fell on the beachhead. Every night, patrols disappeared into the darkness. The 45th Infantry Division had lost nearly 3,000 men trying to break out toward Rome. That morning, Barfoot had already destroyed 3 German machine gun positions and captured 17 prisoners during the initial assault. He had crawled alone through a documented minefield, following drainage ditches to reach the German flank undetected. His Thompson submachine gun had killed 5 enemy soldiers at ranges under 20 yards. The 17 German prisoners his squad had captured were now behind American lines, awaiting transport. But the Tigers changed everything. American infantry had learned to fear these machines. The Tiger's frontal armor measured 100 millimeters thick. Its 88mm gun could penetrate a Sherman tank's armor from ranges where American guns were completely ineffective. German tank commanders knew this advantage and used it ruthlessly. The Anzio breakout depended on momentum. If the German counterattack succeeded in stopping the American advance, the entire offensive would stall. 4 months of bloody fighting would mean nothing. 24,000 casualties would be wasted. Rome would remain in German hands. Barfoot understood the tactical mathematics. 3 Tigers could stop an entire battalion. Each Tiger carried enough ammunition to destroy dozens of targets. Their armor made them nearly invulnerable to frontal attack. Standard doctrine required American infantry to withdraw when Tigers appeared and call for artillery support or tank destroyers. But there was no time for doctrine. The nearest American tanks were 300 yards behind the front line, still moving through the congested breakthrough corridor. Artillery forward observers had lost radio contact during the morning's advance. Tank destroyer battalions were engaged elsewhere on the Cisterna front. No air support was available. The morning's Allied bomber strikes had already concluded. Barfoot looked at the bazooka lying near the destroyed truck. The 2.36-inch rocket launcher was designed for close-range work. General Patton had recommended keeping engagements under 30 yards to ensure effectiveness. 75 yards was more than twice the recommended range. At that distance, the rocket's accuracy decreased significantly. Wind drift became a factor. The shaped charge might not have enough velocity to penetrate even if it hit. The technical manual warned against engaging heavy armor beyond 50 yards. If you want to see how Barfoot's impossible shot turned out, please hit that like button. It helps us share more forgotten stories from the war. Subscribe if you haven't already. Back to Barfoot. The lead Tiger was now 60 yards away. Its commander stood in the open cupola, scanning for targets through binoculars. The tank's 88mm gun traversed slowly left, searching for American positions. Behind it, 2 more Tigers advanced in staggered formation, their engines roaring across the morning battlefield. Barfoot picked up the bazooka. The weapon weighed 13 pounds. Its tube was 5 feet long. The M6A1 rocket could theoretically penetrate 110 millimeters of armor at 0 degrees angle. But only at close range, only under ideal conditions. 75 yards was not ideal. He lifted the bazooka onto his right shoulder and sighted through the crude metal ladder sight. The lead Tiger filled his view. He could see every detail. The overlapping road wheels, the commander's cupola, the long 88mm gun still traversing toward American positions. 1 shot. That was all he would get. The backblast would reveal his position instantly. If he missed, the Tiger's coaxial machine gun would find him in seconds. If he hit but failed to disable the tank, the result would be the same. And even if he stopped the first Tiger, 2 more followed close behind. Barfoot fired. The rocket left the tube with a sharp crack and a blast of smoke that erupted from both ends of the launcher. The backblast wave kicked up dirt and debris behind him. The rocket motor ignited fully after clearing the muzzle, accelerating the projectile across 75 yards of open ground in just over 1 second. The M6A1 rocket struck the lead Tiger's right track assembly at the connection point between the drive sprocket and the first road wheel. The shaped charge detonated on impact. The focus jet of superheated metal burned through the hardened steel track link, severing it completely. The massive track assembly separated and began unwinding from the road wheels as the Tiger's forward momentum carried it another 15 feet. The broken track whipped around the drive sprocket once more before jamming completely between the wheels and the hull. The Tiger lurched to a stop at a 10-degree angle, its damaged right side settling lower as the broken track piled up beneath the hull. The tank commander in the cupola immediately dropped inside and sealed the hatch. Through the vision ports, Barfoot could see the turret beginning to traverse. The Germans were searching for whoever had fired. The other two Tigers had already changed direction. Their commanders had seen the rocket's smoke trail and were turning their massive hulls toward the flanks, moving away from the ambush position. One Tiger angled northeast. The other moved northwest. Both were accelerating, their commanders unwilling to remain stationary in a kill zone where American infantry clearly had anti-tank weapons. Within 30 seconds, both Tigers had withdrawn 200 yards and were moving behind a low ridgeline. But the disabled Tiger remained. Its turret continued traversing, the long 88mm gun sweeping across the sector where Barfoot had fired from. The crew knew they were immobilized. They knew American infantry would be moving toward them. Their only option was to use the main gun and machine guns to create a defensive perimeter until recovery vehicles could reach them. The Tiger's driver attempted to reverse. The left track spun uselessly. The right track remained jammed. The tank rocked slightly, but could not move. Smoke began rising from the damaged drive mechanism. Barfoot watched the cupola hatch. Wehrmacht tank doctrine required disabled crews to either fight from inside the vehicle or evacuate immediately if fire risk was high. The rising smoke suggested the track damage had affected the final drive housing. If lubricating oil had ignited, the crew had perhaps 2 minutes before the engine compartment became an inferno. The turret stopped traversing. The 88mm gun pointed northeast, away from Barfoot's position. The cupola hatch opened. The tank commander emerged first, wearing the standard black Panzer uniform and leather headset. He carried no weapon and moved quickly, climbing out and dropping to the ground on the opposite side of the tank from American positions. 2 more crew members followed within seconds, the driver and radio operator, both unarmed. They had abandoned the Tiger. The 3 Germans ran 20 yards to a shell crater and took cover. They were now exposed infantry without weapons, separated from their disabled tank, with American forces advancing across the entire front. Barfoot moved forward with his Thompson submachine gun. He covered the distance from the destroyed truck to a forward position in 18 seconds, using a destroyed stone wall for concealment. From there, he had a clear angle on the shell crater where the German tank crew had taken cover. The Germans had no weapons. They were separated from their tank. Their 2 supporting Tigers had withdrawn and were now out of visual range. No German infantry reinforcements were visible anywhere on the immediate battlefield. Barfoot approached the crater from the southwest, keeping the Thompson aimed at the position. At 15 yards, he could see all 3 crew members clearly. They saw him simultaneously. The tank commander raised both hands above the crater edge, the universal signal of surrender. The other 2 crew members followed immediately. All 3 climbed out of the crater with hands raised. But the battle was not finished. 600 yards to the north, Barfoot could see German infantry beginning to establish defensive positions near an abandoned artillery emplacement. A single field gun sat unmanned near a stone farmhouse. The crew had apparently fled during the morning's American assault. But if German forces reoccupied that position, the gun could halt the entire American advance through this sector. Barfoot directed the 3 German tank crew members to move toward American lines under guard of advancing infantry from his company. The prisoners would be processed with the 17 others he had captured earlier that morning. But the abandoned German field gun remained his priority. The weapon was a 75mm infantry gun, positioned near a stone farmhouse 400 yards north of the disabled Tiger. The Germans had established the position during the previous night to cover the approaches to Cisterna. If enemy forces reoccupied that gun, it could fire directly down the American advance corridor. Each high-explosive shell could kill or wound dozens of men advancing across open ground. American doctrine required reporting such positions to battalion command and waiting for artillery or airstrikes to neutralize them. But the morning's offensive schedule allowed no delays. Every hour mattered. The breakout from Anzio depended on maintaining momentum. General Truscott had made that clear in his orders to all units. Keep moving. Don't stop. Don't consolidate. Push through resistance. Barfoot moved forward alone. The terrain between his position and the German gun offered minimal concealment. Agricultural fields with scattered stone walls and irrigation ditches. 2 destroyed German half-tracks burning near the farmhouse. Shell craters from the morning's artillery preparation. But no cover that could stop rifle fire. He crossed the open ground in a low crouch, moving from crater to crater. The Thompson submachine gun weighed 10 pounds. He carried 8 30-round magazines. 2 fragmentation grenades remained on his web belt. The bazooka and remaining rockets had been left with his squad. At 200 yards from the farmhouse, Barfoot heard German voices. 3 soldiers emerged from the building, Wehrmacht infantry in standard field gray uniforms. They were moving toward the abandoned gun emplacement, clearly intending to bring the weapon back into action. One carried ammunition boxes. The other 2 had rifles slung over their shoulders. The Germans had not yet seen him. Barfoot took cover behind a low stone wall 30 yards from the farmhouse. The range was too far for accurate Thompson fire, but close enough to observe. If the Germans reached the gun and opened fire on advancing American forces, casualties would be severe. If he engaged them now and missed, they would take cover and radio for reinforcements. He waited. The 3 German soldiers reached the gun position. They began preparing the weapon for action, removing the tarpaulin that had covered the barrel. One soldier opened an ammunition box. Another checked the breech mechanism. The third scanned toward American positions with binoculars. Barfoot moved forward to 20 yards, still behind the stone wall. The Thompson's effective range at that distance gave him perhaps a 3-second window to engage all 3 targets before they could react. He opened fire. The first burst caught the soldier at the breech, 5 rounds at center mass. The German fell beside the gun trail. The second soldier turned toward the sound and received a second burst across the chest. He collapsed over the ammunition box. The third soldier dropped his binoculars and reached for his rifle, but never completed the movement. Barfoot's third burst struck him as he turned. All 3 Germans were down within 4 seconds. Barfoot approached the gun position carefully. All 3 enemy soldiers were dead. The weapon itself remained intact. The 75mm barrel pointed southeast, still aimed at the American advance corridor. Ammunition boxes lay stacked beside the trail. The Germans had intended to fire dozens of rounds into advancing American infantry, but simply leaving the gun was not enough. German forces still held positions throughout this sector. If they counterattacked and recaptured the farmhouse, they would bring this weapon back into action within minutes. Barfoot searched the dead soldiers and found what he needed: 2 potato masher grenades, German Model 24 Stielhandgranate. Each contained a small explosive charge sufficient to damage equipment. He placed both grenades inside the breech mechanism, removed the friction igniters, and stepped back 20 feet. The grenades detonated simultaneously. The blast destroyed the breech block and warped the gun barrel at the chamber. Black smoke poured from the mechanism. The weapon was permanently disabled. But as the smoke cleared, Barfoot heard something that made him freeze: wounded American voices, somewhere close, calling for help. The voices came from a drainage ditch 70 yards east of the destroyed gun position. 2 American soldiers, both wounded, both calling for medics in voices that suggested severe injuries and increasing desperation. Barfoot moved toward the sound, using the scattered stone walls for concealment. German positions remained active throughout this sector. Snipers could be anywhere. Artillery observers could call fire on any exposed movement. The battle was still fluid. Lines were still unclear. He reached the drainage ditch and found them. 2 soldiers from Company L, 3rd Battalion. Both had been hit during the morning assault. The first soldier had taken shrapnel across his left leg and abdomen. Multiple wounds. Blood soaked through his field dressing. The second had been shot through the right shoulder and chest. The bullet had entered just below the collarbone and exited through his back, missing the lung but severing major blood vessels. Both men were conscious but losing blood rapidly. Both had been lying in the ditch for nearly 2 hours since the initial assault. Neither could walk. Neither could apply effective pressure to their own wounds while remaining conscious. Company L's medics had been killed or pinned down during the German counterattack. The wounded had been bypassed as American forces pushed forward, maintaining momentum. Standard battlefield procedure. Medics and recovery teams would follow behind the assault companies. But the German Tiger counterattack had disrupted that process. The recovery teams were still 300 yards behind the front line, dealing with other casualties. Barfoot assessed the situation quickly. Both soldiers needed immediate evacuation to the battalion aid station. That position was 1,700 yards to the rear, behind the original jump-off line near Carano. The distance represented nearly a mile across ground that was still under intermittent German artillery fire and potentially exposed to sniper positions. Carrying both men simultaneously was impossible. They weighed approximately 160 pounds each, plus equipment. Combined weight exceeded 300 pounds. The distance and terrain made simultaneous evacuation physically impossible for one man. He would have to make 2 trips. Barfoot took the soldier with a chest wound first. The shoulder and lung area injuries suggested he had less time. Blood loss from the severed vessels was steady, but not arterial spray. The wound was survivable if he reached medical care within the next hour. Beyond that, shock and blood loss would become irreversible. He positioned himself beside the soldier and pulled the man's right arm across his own shoulders. The wounded soldier used his left arm to grip Barfoot's web gear. Together, they began moving south toward American lines. The weight was immediate and substantial. The wounded soldier could not support his own body weight. His legs dragged. Every step required Barfoot to lift and carry approximately 140 pounds of soldier, plus equipment. The Thompson submachine gun remained slung across his back. His own equipment and ammunition added another 30 pounds. They covered the first 100 yards in 8 minutes. The terrain slowed them constantly. Irrigation ditches required careful navigation. Stone walls forced detours. Shell craters meant choosing between exposure on the rim or exhaustion climbing in and out. German artillery fire continued falling randomly across the sector. 3 shells impacted within 200 yards during the first 10 minutes of movement. Barfoot's legs began burning after 300 yards. His shoulders ached from supporting the wounded soldier's weight. Sweat soaked through his uniform despite the cool morning temperature. His breathing became labored. The hours of combat before this moment had already exhausted him. Crawling through the minefield, destroying the machine gun nests, capturing 17 prisoners, fighting the Tigers, destroying the field gun, now this. At 600 yards, Barfoot stopped for 30 seconds. He adjusted the wounded soldier's position across his shoulders. The man's blood had soaked into Barfoot's uniform. The soldier's breathing had become shallow and rapid. Early signs of shock. They continued moving. 800 yards, 1,000 yards, 1,200 yards. The battalion aid station remained 500 yards away. Barfoot's legs trembled with each step. His vision narrowed slightly from exhaustion and dehydration. The wounded soldier's weight seemed to increase with every yard, but stopping meant the soldier would die in this field. At 1,400 yards, Barfoot saw American positions ahead. Medical personnel were treating casualties near a cluster of destroyed buildings. Stretcher bearers moved between wounded soldiers. The battalion surgeon worked under a canvas tarp stretched between 2 walls. Barfoot reached the aid station at 13 minutes past noon. He had covered 1,700 yards in 43 minutes, carrying the wounded soldier. Medical personnel took the man immediately and began treating the chest wound. The prognosis was uncertain, but the soldier was alive and receiving care. Barfoot allowed himself 90 seconds of rest. He drank water from a canteen offered by a medic. His legs shook from exhaustion. His shoulders burned. The adrenaline that had sustained him through the morning's combat was depleting rapidly. His uniform was soaked with sweat and the wounded soldier's blood. But the second wounded man remained in that drainage ditch 1,700 yards forward. The medic asked if Barfoot needed treatment. He shook his head and turned north toward the sound of continuing artillery fire. The return journey would be faster without carrying a wounded man, but the exhaustion was cumulative. Every muscle ached. His breathing remained labored. 4 hours of continuous combat had pushed him beyond normal physical limits. He moved back across the same ground, past the shell craters, past the stone walls, past the destroyed half-tracks. The German artillery had intensified. 3 shells impacted within 100 yards during his return movement. Shrapnel whined overhead. Smoke obscured sections of the battlefield. At 1,700 yards forward, he found the drainage ditch again. The second soldier was still conscious, but barely. The abdominal and leg wounds had continued bleeding despite the field dressing. The man's skin had gone pale. His pulse was rapid and weak, classic signs of advancing shock. He had perhaps 30 minutes before blood loss became fatal. Barfoot positioned himself and lifted the soldier across his shoulders, using the same technique as before. The weight was identical, but his exhaustion made it feel heavier. His legs protested immediately. His back screamed. The previous carry had depleted reserves he did not know he possessed. They began moving south. The first 200 yards were manageable through sheer determination. The soldier remained conscious enough to grip Barfoot's web gear with one hand. But at 300 yards, the wounded man lost consciousness. His full weight sagged against Barfoot's shoulders. The arm that had been gripping the web gear fell limp. Barfoot adjusted his grip and continued. 400 yards, 500 yards. His vision began tunneling at 600 yards. The edges of his sight darkened slightly. Dehydration and exhaustion were affecting his sensory processing. He forced himself to focus on the terrain immediately ahead. One step, another step. Keep moving. German artillery continued falling randomly across the sector. 2 shells impacted close enough that Barfoot felt the concussion waves. Dirt and shrapnel rained down around him. He kept walking. At 800 yards, his right leg cramped severely. The muscle seized completely for 15 seconds. He stopped, shifted the wounded soldier's weight, and forced the leg to extend through the cramp. The pain was intense but temporary. He resumed walking. 1,000 yards. 1,100 yards. The wounded soldier's breathing had become barely perceptible. His pulse was thread-thin. If he survived, it would be measured in minutes between arrival at the aid station and the beginning of treatment. 1,200 yards. 1,300 yards. Barfoot's own body was approaching complete failure. His legs moved through mechanical repetition rather than conscious control. His arms had gone numb from supporting the soldier's weight. His back felt like it might collapse with each step. But the aid station was now visible 400 yards ahead. Medics saw him coming and ran forward with a stretcher. They took the wounded soldier at 300 yards from the aid station. Barfoot's legs gave out completely as they lifted the weight from his shoulders. He collapsed to his knees in the dirt. The medics carried the soldier to immediate treatment. The battalion surgeon began working within seconds. Barfoot remained on his knees for 2 full minutes before his legs would support standing again. A medic brought water. He drank an entire canteen without stopping. His hands shook. His vision slowly cleared from the tunnel effect. The wounded soldier was alive. Both wounded soldiers had survived the evacuation. Both would make it home. But Van Barfoot's war was not finished. By 1400 hours on May 23rd, the American breakout from Anzio had achieved its initial objectives. The 1st Special Service Force and 1st Armored Division had breached the main German defensive line. The 45th Division had advanced beyond Carano and reached the Campo Leone Cisterna Railroad. Casualties were heavy, but the momentum held. Van Barfoot's actions that morning had contributed directly to that success. The disabled Tiger had blocked a key intersection for 3 hours, preventing German armor reinforcements from reaching the breakthrough point. The destroyed field gun had eliminated a weapon that could have fired dozens of high-explosive shells into advancing American infantry. The 2 evacuated soldiers would survive their wounds and eventually return home. But Barfoot himself had no time to process what he had accomplished. Within 2 hours of reaching the aid station, he was back with his platoon as they consolidated the newly captured ground near Carano. German artillery continued falling. Snipers remained active. The battle was far from over. The official documentation began that evening. His company commander, Captain James Henderson, had witnessed portions of the morning's action and gathered testimony from other soldiers who had seen different elements. The report detailed the minefield crossing, the 3 destroyed machine gun positions, the 17 prisoners, the disabled Tiger at 75 yards, the 3 killed German soldiers at the field gun, the destroyed artillery piece, the evacuation of 2 wounded men across 1,700 yards under fire. Henderson recommended Barfoot for the Medal of Honor. The recommendation went through battalion, regiment, and division levels within 48 hours. Each commander added supporting documentation. The speed was unusual, but the scope of the actions warranted it. By May 30th, the recommendation had reached 5th Army headquarters in Rome. General Mark Clark had just entered the city to global acclaim. But even amid that historic moment, Barfoot's actions stood out. Clark approved the Medal of Honor recommendation and forwarded it to Army headquarters in Washington. On June 21, 1944, while still fighting in Italy, Van Barfoot received a battlefield commission. He was promoted from Technical Sergeant to 2nd Lieutenant. The promotion recognized not just the May 23rd actions, but his consistent leadership and tactical skill throughout 4 months of Anzio combat. The promotion came with a choice. He could return to the United States for officer training and to receive his Medal of Honor from President Roosevelt in a White House ceremony, or he could remain with his unit as it pushed north through Italy and prepared for the invasion of southern France. Barfoot chose to stay. He told his company commander that the men he had fought beside for 4 months deserved to see their battles through together. The recognition could wait. The war could not. By July, the 45th Division had advanced north of Rome and was preparing for Operation Dragoon, the invasion of southern France. Barfoot, now a second lieutenant, commanded a rifle platoon. The same men he had served with as a technical sergeant now followed him as their officer. The transition was seamless because the respect had already been earned. On August 15, 1944, the 45th Division landed on the French coast near Saint-Tropez. The invasion met lighter resistance than Normandy, but still required 3 weeks of intense fighting to secure the beachhead and advance inland. Barfoot's platoon participated in operations throughout the Rhone Valley. By September, the division had pushed deep into eastern France and was approaching the German border. They were now fighting in the Vosges Mountains, terrain that favored defense and made every advance costly. The weather had turned cold, supplies were stretched, casualties mounted steadily. On September 28, 1944, the division paused operations near Epinal, France. The town had been liberated 3 days earlier. 5th Army Headquarters had established a temporary command post in a requisitioned hotel. Lieutenant General Alexander Patch, commanding 7th Army, arrived that morning with specific orders. He was there to conduct a Medal of Honor presentation ceremony in the field at the recipient's request. Van Barfoot stood in a muddy field outside Epinal, surrounded by soldiers from his company, his battalion, his regiment. The men he had fought beside for nearly a year. Some had been at Anzio, some had joined as replacements. All understood what the ceremony represented. General Patch read the official citation aloud. The words described May 23rd in clinical military language. Conspicuous gallantry, intrepidity at risk of life, beyond the call of duty. The citation detailed each action methodically, but the soldiers listening already knew the story. The ceremony lasted 12 minutes. General Patch pinned the Medal of Honor to 2nd Lieutenant Van Barfoot's uniform and saluted. The assembled soldiers, nearly 300 men from the 45th Division, stood at attention in the rain. No speeches beyond the citation reading, no press photographers, no dignitaries from Washington, just soldiers recognizing one of their own. Barfoot returned the salute, thanked General Patch, and walked back to his platoon. Within 2 hours, his unit was back on patrol. The war continued. The Battle of Anzio, where Barfoot had earned his medal, had produced more Medal of Honor recipients than any other single battle in World War II. 22 Americans received the nation's highest decoration for actions during those 4 months of combat. The statistic reflected the intensity and desperation of the fighting. Every day required extraordinary courage just to survive. Some days required actions that transcended even that standard. Barfoot's continued service demonstrated something the medal itself could not capture. The actions of May 23rd were not aberrations. They were examples of sustained excellence under conditions that broke lesser men. He had fought at Anzio from January through May. He had participated in the Sicily landings in July 1943. He had been at Salerno in September. Each operation had been brutal. Each had demanded everything, and he kept volunteering for more. By December 1944, the 45th Division was fighting in the Vosges Mountains and preparing to enter Germany itself. Barfoot commanded his platoon through the winter advance, leading reconnaissance patrols and assault operations in terrain that favored defenders. The fighting was methodical and costly. German forces contested every village, every crossroads, every bridge. The war in Europe ended on May 8, 1945. Barfoot had been in continuous combat for nearly 2 years across 3 countries, but military service did not end with Germany's surrender. Professional soldiers like Barfoot remained in uniform, training new recruits and preparing for whatever came next. What came next was Korea. In June 1950, North Korean forces invaded South Korea and pushed American and South Korean troops into a defensive perimeter around Busan. The United States mobilized rapidly, deploying units from around the world. Van Barfoot, now a captain, deployed with his regiment in August 1950 and fought through the Busan breakout, the advance to the Yalu River, and the subsequent Chinese intervention. Korea was different from Europe. The terrain was more mountainous, the weather more extreme. The enemy tactics emphasized night attacks and infiltration rather than set-piece battles, but the fundamentals remained identical. Lead from front, make decisions under fire, keep your soldiers alive. Barfoot earned the Bronze Star and Purple Heart during Korean combat. The details were not widely publicized, but the awards indicated continued effectiveness under fire. He returned from Korea in 1951 with a promotion to major. By 1960, at age 40, Barfoot made an unusual career decision. He transferred to the newly formed Army Aviation Branch. The Army needed experienced combat leaders who could understand how to integrate helicopters into ground operations. Barfoot attended flight school, earned his wings, and became one of the first senior officers to specialize in helicopter operations. When American involvement in Vietnam escalated in 1965, Barfoot volunteered for deployment despite being 46 years old. Most officers his age were serving in staff positions or preparing for retirement. Barfoot wanted to fly combat missions. He deployed to Vietnam as lieutenant colonel in 1966 and flew 177 combat hours in both helicopters and fixed-wing aircraft. His Medal of Honor from World War II and his combat experience from 3 wars made him valuable as an aviation advisor. He understood how air assets could support ground operations because he had been the soldier on the ground calling for that support. Barfoot retired as a colonel in 1974 after 34 years of military service. 3 wars, dozens of decorations, a career that spanned from the Italian mountains to the Vietnamese highlands. The Medal of Honor was the most visible recognition, but hardly the complete measure of his contribution. He settled on a farm in Virginia and raised the American flag every morning until his death in 2012 at age 92. The question his story raises is simple but profound. What creates the difference between soldiers who follow orders competently and soldiers who accomplish what doctrine says cannot be done? Van Barfoot faced 3 Tiger tanks at 75 yards with a weapon designed for 30-yard engagements. Doctrine said withdraw and call for support. Physics said the shot would probably miss at that range. Survival instinct said any shot would reveal his position and draw immediate fire from 3 88mm guns that could destroy him instantly. He fired anyway. The technical aspects of that shot deserve examination. The M6A1 Bazooka rocket had to travel 75 yards accurately enough to hit a moving target. The shaped charge had to penetrate at a range where velocity was degraded. The hit location had to disable the tank rather than merely damage cosmetic components. Every variable was unfavorable. Every calculation suggested failure. But calculations assume average conditions and average soldiers. Barfoot was neither. His crawl through the minefield that morning demonstrated understanding of terrain and patience under pressure. His destruction of 3 machine gun positions showed tactical intelligence and close combat skill. His capture of 17 prisoners indicated ability to exploit success rapidly. The bazooka shot against the Tigers proved willingness to attempt the impossible when the tactical situation demanded it. But perhaps the most revealing aspect was what came after. The evacuation of 2 wounded soldiers across 1,700 yards while exhausted from hours of combat showed something beyond tactical skill or physical courage. It demonstrated the fundamental principle that separates ordinary soldiers from extraordinary ones. The mission is not complete until everyone who can be saved has been saved. Barfoot could have reported the wounded soldier's location and waited for stretcher bearers. Doctrine supported that choice. His exhaustion justified it. The continuing German artillery made it reasonable. But he made 2 trips across nearly 2 miles of contested ground because 2 soldiers needed help and he was capable of providing it. That calculus, repeated across 3 wars and 34 years of service, defined his career. Not the decorations, not the promotions, the simple mathematics of what needed to be done versus what he was capable of doing. The disabled Tiger at Carano sat immobilized for 3 hours because of 1 rocket fired at impossible range by 1 sergeant who refused to accept that doctrine sometimes means defeat. The American breakout from Anzio succeeded partly because soldiers like Barfoot made individual decisions that compounded into operational success. 24,000 American casualties at Anzio, 22 Medal of Honor recipients, 4 months of continuous combat in a 7-mile perimeter. The mathematics of that battle were brutal and simple. Survive each day. Help the men beside you survive. Accomplish the mission despite the cost. Barfoot did that for 4 months at Anzio. Then he did it again in Korea, then Vietnam. 34 years of service, 3 wars, 1 consistent principle. If this story moved you the way it moved us, do me a favor. Hit that like button. Every single like tells YouTube to show this story to more people. Hit subscribe and turn on notifications. We're rescuing forgotten stories from dusty archives every single day. Stories about infantry sergeants who stopped tiger tanks with impossible shots. Real people, real heroism. Drop a comment right now and tell us where you're watching from. Are you watching from the United States, United Kingdom, Canada, Australia? Our community stretches across the entire world. You're not just a viewer, you're part of keeping these memories alive. Tell us your location. Tell us if someone in your family served. Just let us know you're here. Thank you for watching. And thank you for making sure Van Barfoot doesn't disappear into silence. These men deserve to be remembered, and you're helping make that happen. May 23rd, 1944. 1 sergeant, 3 tigers, 75 yards, 1 impossible shot, and everything that followed.